Yeah. So we were talking about the confidentiality part, right? So we were talking about VPN and we have seen confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we started discussing something called as confidentiality. So confidentiality is going to be achieved through the help of encryption. The encryption is a reversible process, which means what? It can be decrypted to get the clear text. Now, encryption is going to be purely dependent on something called as what, an algorithm and also a key. Algorithm is open standard, whereas key is going to be very specific to the communication. So based on the key, we categorize this encryption into two types. One is called as what? Symmetric, and the other one was called as what? Asymmetric. When I talk about symmetric, I said that both the parties are going to be using the same key for encryption as well as decryption, and that's where we started discussing about certain examples: DES, triple DES, then AES, the popular algorithms. Don't think that we have only these things. We also have ECDES, ECAES. There are certain other elliptical curve data encryption standard, which is an advanced one in IC version 2 and all. We will be working with those algorithms only. So DES is an example of your block cipher, which means what? A block of data is going to be processed at once. When it comes to stream cipher, character by character, the process is going to be done. We also have stream cipher, but we are talking about what? Block cipher. So DES is going to be protecting the data by encrypting it. What is the size of this DES algorithm? It's actually speaking 64 bits, right? So 64-bit is the key size. What is the significance of knowing about these key sizes? DES is 64, triple DES is what? 192. 3 times of DES is what? 3 DES. AES comes in 3 different flavors like 128, 192 and 256 bits. Now, what is the significance of knowing about the key sizes? See, it will be a little complicated as you have the key size is larger. At the same time, the resources which is being utilized for maintaining and encrypting, decrypting is also going to be overutilized. If the key sizes are larger, the resource utilization will also be more. The key sizes are lesser, then obviously resource utilization will be very little. But at the same time, the complexity when it comes to cracking an encrypted text, if it is using a lesser key size, a small key size, will be very limited. So easily it can be cracked. But my point is, when I say easily, it is not that you think of it and you can crack it, but the complications are very less. When I said DES, or when I'm talking about the key sizes, think about a number lock suitcase. If you have a number lock suitcase and you have only one column of it, if you go for a brute force, what is that brute force? Trying out all possible combinations. You have only one single column, you don't remember the key. Then how do you unlock the suitcase? You will try out all possible combination, right? You will start from 0 and at the end of time it will be 9. So at once the suitcase can be unlocked. If you are the luckiest person, maybe by 0 itself your suitcase could be unlocked. If you are unlucky person, then obviously you have to try all the possible combination. The last combination would be your unlocking key. But if I have a single column, I have to try out 10 times. At once I will be able to open it. What if I increase the columns from 1 to 2, 100 times or 100 combinations are there? What if I increase one more column? Then I have 1000 combinations. What if one more? Like that. Think about the complications as you increase the number of column, number of row, number of positions. You can see that the complication in identifying the key to unlock it is going to be little complicated, right? So that's where the key sizes are playing very vital role. One more thing you have to remember, what is that? As the key size increases, the resource which is being utilized to keep, to protect the data is also going to be more. Okay, so lesser the key size, resource utilization will be little. At the same time, the complexity of cracking is also very limited. You understand what I'm saying? Now, when I say DES 64-bit, when I say 64-bit, it is not that the complete 64 bits are going to be used for encryption. For example, for every yes, yes. Oh my God, I don't know what is going on. yes, and one I'm noticing in my whiteboard. Is any other complication is there? Probably I may need to reset my Mac to get the complete information. It's getting disconnected, I guess. Hope you're able to see now. Yes, I am able to see it. Okay, so we have this. The key size, what I said, is 64 bits, but probably when you are reading the books, you could see only 56 bits. Both are correct. How come you can have a two answer for a single question? It's quite possible. See, when I say that, the key size is 64 bits, but the usable key size is only 56 bit. How come? Because for every byte, one bit is reserved for the parity. So out of 64 bits, how many bytes you have? 8 bytes. So for every bit, one bit is reserved for the parity. So you are getting only 56 bits as the usable key sizes. Same way, if you apply this triple des, 3 times of des, you have 192 bits as the total key size. Again, for every byte, one bit is going to be reserved for parity. So you have to take out 3 into 8, 24 bit. If you take out the 24 bit, you will get 168 bits of key size. But keep in mind, 168 or what? 28, 162, right? Okay, 24 bit, 24, 192 minus 24 is what? 8, 6, correct only, 168 bit. Fine. So here this is going to be 56. 3 into 56 is what? 168. That is the actual usable key size of your triple des. But keep in mind, when I say des and triple des, in what way they vary, consider des as your zip. While you are zipping it, you are using one password for protecting it. It's quite possible, right? You have a document, you are trying to compress that. While you are compressing it, you are setting up the password. Without knowing that password, decompressing that file is not going to be happening, right? When it comes to 3des, think about the same file is being zipped with one password. You got a zip file. The second time, the zip is being zipped again with another password. The third time, again, the zipped file is going to be zipped. Can I do that or not? I have a file, a document file, right? I'm just sending it to the zip process. I'm getting a zip one. While I'm zipping it, I'm also adding a password one. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now the zip one is sent to the zip process once again with as password number 2, you will get zip2 file. Again, the zip2 is going to be sent to the zip process with the password 3 and you are getting zip3. You understand what I'm saying? Is this clear? 3 times? Yeah. So now the question would be, why don't I use the same password all 3 times? It will be as simple as cracking this, because if you can convince or if you can compromise one password, the same password is what you will be using over here and here and here. Am I right? So that's why we are trying to use 3 different passwords altogether. Now, when it comes to triple des, the same process, the same logic is going to be used. I'm taking a block of data and which is being sent to the des process. While I'm encrypting the data, I'll be using the key. Then I got a ciphertext 1. That ciphertext 1 will be sent to the des process once again, and while encrypting, I'm going to be using a different password altogether. So I got zip2 or ciphertext 2. Same way, the ciphertext 2 is being sent to the des process once again with a different password. I got ciphertext 3. Of course, there are so many algorithms within how the data is going to be protected. I think I lost my connection on my laptop. Okay, I don't know what is going on my, probably it's because of my storage. I have 10 GB of free space, which is more than enough. Probably I may need to recover my MacBook. Give me a minute, let me try to connect using my mobile and check it out. If it is working fine, then I can use my mobile itself. Okay. Hope you're able to see my screen once again now. Anyway, so the same logic is what we are going to be using it. A block of data is going to be sent to the disk process. While I'm encrypting the data, I'm going to be using a key. And then we got a ciphertext 1. That ciphertext 1 has been sent to disk process once again. While the encryption is happening for the second time, I will use a different key. Again, I got ciphertext 2. That ciphertext 2 will be sent to the disk process once again. While you're encrypting the data for the third time, I'm using a different key so that I'll get ciphertext 3. So if this data needs to be decrypted by an attacker, even though the algorithm is known to them, probably he may need to compromise 3 different keys. Only then he'll be able to get the original data. Am I right or not? So to this unzip this zip 3, you should know password 3. Only then you will get it the zip 2. That zip 2 needs to be unzipped. Then you need to know password 2. Then you will get zip 1. Zip 1 needs to be decrypted. You have to unzip it. While you're doing it, you need to know the password 1. Only then you will get the original document. You can open and read it. The same logic applied over there also. But there is one complication is here. You remember, as the key size increases, right? As the key size increases, the resources are going to be utilized more. At the same time, you have to keep that keys in a safe place. Now I have 3 keys while I'm using the triple disk. So I need to utilize the memory for storing these 3 keys just for one tunnel. Think about if I have 100 tunnels, 100 into 3, 300 keys are going to be stored in my memory, and all of them are little bit higher bit rate. Then what will happen? The resource which is being utilized for encryption and decryption. 3 times the encryption is going to happen, 3 times the decryption is going to be happening. Think about how much of resource is going to be utilized for protecting the data. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Okay. Now, one more thing is, see, when I say encrypting the data, I have clear text, okay? So I have clear text, or let me say that A, or any character, you take any character. So A, to encrypt it, let me call this as what? This is A, oh, sorry. Like this is A. No, it is not that always A has to be rotated to the flipped over to the right side of right side portion to get the data, or you can also go for reverse side to encrypt the data. What I mean to say, by decrypting the data also the encryption is possible. I'll give you a simple example for this. Let me say that one of the popular ciphering tool is called, ciphering algorithm is called as Caesar Cipher 3. When I say Caesar Cipher 3, it's a stream cipher. Let's say that I would like to send Gopi, right? So what will happen if I'm going to be using the Caesar Cipher 3? Okay, Caesar Cipher is the algorithm, 3 is the key. Now, what that algorithm says that you have an alphabet. If you wanted to send A, instead of sending A, what is the key or what is the third position? What is the alphabet that you can find in third position? Because the key is 3. What is the alphabet that you can see in the third position from that alphabet? So G, instead of G, what will be the third position? G, H, I. So I'm just changing G into I, O, P, Q, and PQR and IJK. So while I'm sending the data, I'm just sending it as IQRK instead of Gopi. People whomever sees that, they can read IQRK, but they cannot get the original meaning of it. When it comes to the receiver, he's going to be reversing that process like what? -3 position from the alphabet. So encryption is going to be happening +3, decryption is going to be happening -3. So now he will be able to get GOPI. You understand? This is a Caesar Cipher 3. Now I told you that sender is sending the data. While he is sending, +3 position is what is going to be used. What if the sender is going to be using -3 to encrypt the data? Which means what? He is going for the reverse direction. He is decrypting the data to encrypt it. Now what the other side has to do is, he has to go for +3. When he encrypts it, he will get the original text. So it is not that encryption alone we can use it for protecting the data or encrypting the data. We can also reverse the process to encrypt the data. So in that way, what happens in triple disk, there is an algorithm. The one what we have seen is called as 3EEE. That means 3 times we will use 3 keys, 3 unique keys, and every time we will encrypt it. Encrypt. 3 times the process is going to be happening, right? There is also possible by reducing the number of keys to 2 and then encryption using the first key, decrypting the data using the second key, from that perspective, it's a wrong key. If I use the right key, then I'll get the clear text. So key number 1 is being used for encryption. Key number 2 is being used for decryption. Key number 3 is again being, sorry, key number 1 is again being used for encryption. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now in this way, you can provide better protection than 3EEE. Resource utilization, memory utilization is also going to be reduced because I'm going to be using only 2 keys. I don't need to overutilize my memory. At the same time, encryption, decryption, encryption process helps me to protect more than 3EEE process. So why we have to know about it? Because in most of the cases, see, in financial services, they least bother about the resource utilization. They will focus more on what is it called, these protection. In that case, again, 3 keys are far better than 2 keys. That's how they will go for it. And if you wanted to support 3EEE, make sure that the device on which you are terminating the VPN is supporting that 3EEE. How do I know about it? There is something called as what FIPS, and there are certain standards, right? So ECSA labs. So FIPS labs and ECSA labs, they are the body who will be validating about what are all the functionalities are supported by each and every product. You can go and identify what is available, right? You understand what I'm saying? So DES is 64-bit, usable key size is 56-bit. 3DES is 192 bits, usable size is 168 bits. AES comes in 3 different flavors: 128, 192, 256. Now, based on what the algorithms are going to be chosen, or based on what the key sizes are going to be chosen, that is purely dependent on the lifetime of data. Assume that I have a data that is valid for only 1 day. What is the point in going for overprotecting it? As long as the data can be protected until tomorrow, which is more than enough. Whatever the key size, whatever the algorithm which is sufficient for protecting the data until its lifetime, go for it. Don't go for always a higher key size, and don't go for always a lower key size. Understand that what type of data we are trying to protect, what is the lifetime of it, and what is the criticality if the data is lost or if the data has been compromised. Based on that only the algorithm will be chosen. As a security administrator or firewall administrator, what we normally do, we will be having a template, right? So if this data, what is the kind of a protection we have to apply, they would have given that information. We will choose AES 128, and we wouldn't be seeing that as why we are using AES 128, but I would normally recommend to go for why this algorithm has been recommended to use it. So go and look into the data, why they have recommended, you can easily understand it. You understand what I'm trying to say here? Is that clear? Okay, now that is symmetric. When it comes to asymmetric, both the parties will be using a pair of key, right? So a pair of key is going to be used in asymmetric, key 1 and key 2. Both the keys are mathematically related. Cryptography is full of mathematics. How many of you remember some movies when I'm talking about cryptography, which you likes a lot? Any one movie that you can suggest me so that I can watch it? Anyone? You guys don't watch movie, huh? You guys watch movies or not? It seems nobody would watch movies. Okay, I watch a lot of movies. Okay, anyway. So, how many of you have seen the movie called Imitation Game? Probably would have seen it, but would have not correlated it. Imitation Game, you guys have seen it? Okay. Now, what is the story? It's actually speaking a biography, right? That enigma, how this enigma encryption technology is being cracked. Then A Beautiful Mind. How many of you have seen Beautiful Mind? And there is also a movie called as War Games. War Games has given you a lot of terminology to our industry. I don't know whether you guys have seen it or not. In one period, the War Games was almost like every week they used to telecast in Star movies. And by that time, I used to say my students that please watch this movie and try to understand what is the terminology. Even we had a class like that. Watch this movie and come back and tell me what is that you got it from that movie. Like the discussion, whatever we had today, and there are certain relevancy with that movie. So that movie has given certain terminology to our security industry. What was the terminology that was asking them? If you get a chance, watch those movies. Again, there is a serial called as 24. How many of you have seen a serial called as 24? I don't know. Okay, seems you guys are so busy with your work and other things. But try to spend some time on these things. It would be quite interesting. See, most of the time the problem with our reading is what? Where do I apply this technology and how do I apply this technology? When it comes to this kind of a serials and movies, you can really understand where it is being applied. Sorry. Which one? Which one? Inception. Almost all Christopher Nolan movies are like that only. I think Inception is Christopher Nolan, right? Uh, oh, okay, okay. Maybe Shutter Island is Nolan's. Yes, Shutter Island is Christopher Nolan's. No. Inception is also Christopher Nolan only. Please cross check it. I think it's Christopher Nolan. Okay, we have moved from VPN to movies section. Anyway, so try to watch these serials on and all. So if anybody wanted to know about the other serials and movies, please ping me in private. I will tell you a list of things that you have to watch. You must watch, and you will be quite interested because whatever you read and you can see them, you can interpret your theory over there, so that you can easily understand where and how these are being applied. Once you know how and where this is being applied, you won't forget at all. Anyway, so now key 1 and key 2 is going to be used in asymmetric, and these keys are mathematically related, right? Even though they are mathematically related, by having one key, you will not be able to derive the other. They are related to each other. If you have key 1, can I calculate key 2? No, it's not possible. Same way, if I have key 2, can I calculate key 1? That is also not possible. That's the logic you must understand with respect to asymmetric cryptography. Now, in what way they are related then? That's where the beauty comes into picture. The point is, you can use any key for locking it. That means you can use any key for encryption. You wanted to use key 1 for encryption? Do it. Or you wanted to encrypt the data using key 2? You can do it. It's not a problem at all. But there is a different condition over here. What is that? If you are using key 1 for encryption, then that encrypted data can be decrypted only using the key 2. Something like your bank locking system, right? What normally we do? We can lock our locker, right? To unlock it, we need to have the banker also, right? The banker will come, he will put his key, only then we will be able to open it. So once the locker has been unlocked, he will remove his key and he will go out of it. While we are going, all we have to do is lock it. Can I unlock using the same key always? No, obviously no. So we need a supporting key to unlock it. That's little bit different logic. But anyway, here when it comes to cryptography, I can use key 1 for encryption. Then the condition is what? You have to use the key 2 for decryption. The same logic applies on the other as well. Key 2 is being used for encryption. You can do that one. Then the condition is what? Key 1 has to be used for decrypting the data. This is the only logic. The rest of the things are going to be the same. Can you please tell me the popular asymmetric algorithms? Anyone? Yep, RSA, your Diffie-Hellman is asymmetric algorithm, and we also have digital certificates. They're also asymmetric algorithms only. But anyway, so RSA is popular asymmetric algorithm. And one more thing, the minimum key size of asymmetric algorithm is 512 bits. Less than 512 bits, you wouldn't be in a position to see them, right? And they can go for 4096 bits also. People might be asking, then why don't I use asymmetric algorithm to encrypt the data? So there are certain complications. You remember that it is not that always you have to go for highest bit size algorithm for protecting the data. As the key sizes are larger, the resource utilization, the memory utilization is going to be used more. So we don't want to simply use higher bit sized algorithms for protecting the data or encrypting the data. Then where these asymmetric algorithms are going to be used? In certain cases, like what? To exchange the symmetric key. How do I exchange? See, we have participant A and we also have B. they have to use an identical key between each other to protect the data, to encrypt and decrypt it. How come A and B can have an identical key? Assume that A is creating a key and he is sending that key through the mail. Is that the secure way of exchanging the key? See, A is configuring a password and he is calling the other party B and telling him that, okay, this is the password I'm using. Can you please use it? Is that the secured way of using it? Exchanging the key? Or can I SMS him or can I WhatsApp him? Is that the secured method of exchanging the key? Then how do the parties can have the same key being generated automatically or exchanged between A and B? That's where the asymmetric algorithms comes into picture. So what I'm trying to mean it as, we protect the exchange of symmetric keys through the help of asymmetric keys. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. Now there is one point here. I have peer A and peer B. Now what happens? Both the parties have to generate a pair of keys. What is that called? Let's say A has generated A1 and A2. B has generated B1 and B2. So both the parties have to generate a pair of key. They are mathematically related. Which one? B1 and B2 is related. A1 and A2 is related. Okay. Now if you see that the Diffie-Hellman algorithm, what it is saying that they are going to be generating a session key. We will see that one later on while we are talking about this IPsec. Now the point is, according to this asymmetric algorithm, they have said that one key can be shared, but can be shared with anyone. Even in public, that key can be shared, and they identified that key itself as a public key. So one key can be shared in public, which key has been identified as public key, whereas one key needs to be kept in private. That key is known as a private key. The same way, and B also will have a private key and public key. When A and B wanted to talk to each other, the first thing they do is they will exchange their public keys. Now A will be sending the public key to B, now which is A2. B will be sending its public key to A. Now A has B2. Am I right? Am I audible? Or I'm talking alone? I'm not sure. Am I audible? Okay. Now the point here is, when A wanted to protect the data, A is trying to send some data to B. What A will do is, it will encrypt the data using B's public key. Now, if anything has been encrypted using B2 or B's public key, which key can be used for decrypting it? Understand the algorithm of asymmetric. If key 1 is being used for encryption, then key 2 has to be used for decryption. If key 2 is being used for encryption, then key 1 has to be used for decryption. Now, according to this, B2 is being used for encryption, then which key has to be used for decryption? B1. B1 is the private key. Who owns and who keeps that key? Only B. That B1 is not available with anyone. Am I right? Now, when A is sending this data over the public, even though the rest of the team, rest of the public can see it, but nobody can decrypt it, only B can decrypt it. Why? Because B has B1. Same way, for this, when B is responding back, you have some data that is going to be encrypted using A's public key, which is A2, right? This is the key I'll be using it. Now, if A2 is being used for encryption, then which key has to be used for decryption? A1. Who has that A1? Only A has A1, because A1 is the private key. So this is how the data communication on your public key cryptography or asymmetric encryption is happening. Is that clear? Is that clear? Okay. Now, if A is encrypting the data using A1, then who can decrypt it? If A is encrypting the data using A1, who can decrypt it? Who has A2? Anyone can have A2, because A2 is the public key, correct? Even I can ask for A2. Hey A, can you please share your public key with me? I will get it. Now, if A is encrypting the data using A1, whomever is having A2, because it is a public key, it is quite possible many people can have A's public key. Every one of them can decrypt it, correct? Is that correct? Now tell me, sorry, was there a question? If any data is being encrypted using someone's private key, that can be decrypted using the public key of the same entity, but the public key is available across the public, right? So anyone could have it. Whomever is having my public key can simply decrypt my data. You encrypted using my private key. Am I right? Is that true or not? But the point is, are we using this anywhere? Encrypting something using my private key. Am I doing somewhere? Anywhere in production? Maybe encrypting the data using the neighbor's public key, we might be using it. But do we use encrypting something using my private key? Are we using somewhere? Anyone? Actually speaking, we are using it. Okay, in digital certificates. What is that digital certificate is being used and how it is being used? Let's assume that. Okay, now it's a certificate, right? Digitally, we have a certificate. So the certificate will be having all the data, right? Then this is going to be given for signing. That signing is going to be done by a CA. What CA will do? The CA will extract all the values in the certificate and then it is going to be hashed. We will see what is the hashing later on. In the next section we will see it. So that hash value will be encrypted using the private key of CA. If the private key of CA is being used for encryption, then which key has to be used for decryption? CA's public key. Who will have CA's public key? Almost everyone will. It's a well-known CA, then obviously we will have public key of CA's. If I have the public key of CA, what I can do is I can decrypt it and then I will get the hash value. Now the significance of hash, we will get it. Okay? You're getting my point, right? We will see that one. There is one more place where we will be using our private key to encrypt the data. When I encrypt the data using my private key, if somebody can decrypt it using my public key, the assurance is what? The data is coming from me, no one else. Am I right? See, if a data has been sent to you, which has been encrypted, and you can successfully decrypt that using my public key, my public key, what is that you can confirm? It is coming from me. That validation is happening, right? So non-repudiation is being addressed here. What is that non-repudiation? Why we people are asking always send an email instead of giving oral instruction? Because when I'm sending an email, that is the confirmation that later on the sent party cannot withdraw or cannot say that I didn't ask for it. It's his email that is there in email, which is a proof. The same way, if anything I'm sending, by encrypting that using my private key, anybody can decrypt it, but only the confirmation is what? It is coming from me. That's a kind of a confirmation my receivers can get it if the data is going to be encrypted using my private key. You're getting my point? Hope I'm not confusing you. Right. The second component of your CIA triad is integrity. I think I have to cut short the discussion so that it will be faster. Okay. So what is this integrity? Am I boring you? Can I get into the direct VPN configuration part? Is that okay to continue? Okay. So the integrity, what is that integrity? Now, how many of you are having loans? In form of housing loan or vehicle loan or personal loan? Anyone has a loan or not? Almost everyone would be having it, right? So while you are, it's my assumption, probably a couple of people may not be having a loan, but it's just my assumption. Let's take a case. if you're planning to apply for a loan, what and all they will be asking, the bank will be asking for your ID proof, your address proof, and then your where you are working, your pay slips, right? Those kind of informations they will ask it. But even then, they will check your CIBIL score. Am I right? Why they are checking the CIBIL score? CIBIL score is your integrity with respect to your payment against the loans. Whatever the loans that you have taken, what is your repayment behavior? Is there is any default? Is there is any delayed payment? Based on that only the CIBIL score is going to be coming up. So that is your integrity. If your integrity is not good, then you will not be getting the loan. I mean, what is the point in talking about that here? Anyway, here also the same thing. See, the data has been encrypted and sending, see, integrity, no need to be always used with encryption, but it can be used with encryption, even it can be used without encryption also. I'm just taking a guess. I'm sending text, okay? A is sending a text. It could be encrypted or unencrypted. It doesn't matter. Since it is being traveling, it is being sent on the wire, it is quite possible that somebody could modify the data so that when the receiver receives, it could give a different meaning for them, right? So A is sending some data while it is traveling on the wire, somebody is modifying it. How come B can confirm that the received data is modified or not? How does the B can understand it? That is where the integrity comes into picture. Now the integrity is going to be achieved through the hashing process. So hashing is a one-way, unlike your encryption. It's a one-way, non-reversible process. Hashing is a one-way, non-reversible process. My point here is, from text you can generate the hash. From hash you will not be able to get the text back. You understand what I'm saying? So integrity is going to be used by the receiver to confirm that whether the received data has been modified on the wire or not. To do that one, we are taking the help of a function called as hashing. Hashing is a one-way, non-reversible process, which means you can generate the hash from text, but you will not be able to get the text from the hash. And one of the beauty of hashing is what? As long as you have the same file or data, whatever you have, you might be having an application, you might be having a data, you might be having anything. So you can generate the hash against it. The beauty of it, as long as the file is identical, is the same, you generate the hashing on top of that file 100 times or 1000 times, it doesn't matter, you will still get the same hash value. Hash value is going to be a fixed length output, okay? So if A is generating the hash value on top of it, you will get the same hash value. If B is generating the hash value on top of the file, he will also get the same hash value. So using this logic, the integrity of the message is going to be addressed. How? When A is trying to send some data, what he will do is, this is the data he wanted to send, he takes the copy and then it is going to be sent through the hash process, he will get the hash value, right? So this hash value got generated from the copy of the data, not from the original data. So I have taken the copy and then I'm generating the hash value. So we already know, if you're sending something inside your hash process, the output is going to be hash value. You cannot reverse that. So we got the hash value. That hash value is also going to be attached as part of my exchange. While the data is being transmitted on the wire, assuming that the data has not been modified, so the B will receive the exact set of data. After he receives it, he is going to be storing the received hash in a safe place. He is going to be storing the received hash in a safe place. He has his own received data. He will take the copy and then he will send it through the hash process. He will get a hash value. I'm calling it as a generated hash. If the generated hash and received hash is matching, then the receiver can confirm that the data has not been modified. If there is a difference in the received hash value and the generated hash value, then the receiver can confirm that the data is not intact, right? The data has been modified. You understand what I'm saying? So hashing is a one-way process, one-way non-reversible process. As long as the data has not been modified, whether you generate the hash value or I generate the hash value or someone else is generating the hash value, all will get the same identical hash values. That's the reason while you are trying to download an application from the OEMs, from Cisco you are downloading, or from Juniper you are downloading, from F5 you are downloading a client software, they will also embed a hash value. I hope you guys remember, while you are downloading the operating system for your Cisco routers and switches, they will also be having an MD5 associated with it. How many of you remember it while you are downloading it for upgradation? How many of you remember that? Do anyone remember that? How many of you have upgraded your routers and switches in production? Exactly. What is that? So the MD5 value has been generated by Cisco itself. After you download, you will generate that MD5 hash value against the downloaded file, and then you will compare both of them. If both of them are identical, you have a perfect download. While you're downloading, if some portion of the data has been missed out, or the file got corrupted, then the hash value will not be matching. That itself is going to be giving you the confirmation to upgrade the router using your downloaded iOS or not. The downloaded file is same, then you will get the same hash value. You can proceed with upgrading your devices. If the hash value is not matching, then you may need to download the file once again, cross check the hash value, then you can do it. And that's the reason you can see that many of the sites, they will be hosting these files to be downloaded. Why? As they are giving free service, they will embed some malwares into it. So you might be feeling that, okay, instead of downloading from Cisco site, they are asking me to log in. Let me go to this portal and download it. As you are downloading it, obviously, what will happen? You might be downloading the malwares as well. So be careful. So if you wanted to download any of these files, go to the direct OEM portal and then log in with your credentials, download it. Let it be slow, it doesn't matter for us, right? We have to download the original operating system without any malware. After you download, cross check this hash value with each other, then you can decide on it. You understand what I'm saying? Now the popular hashing algorithms are MD5, right, and SHA. Of course, SHA-1, SHA-256, there are many things are there. Anyway, MD5, MD7 is also there. So MD5, you will get 128 bits output, whereas SHA, you will get 160 bits of output. When you're generating the hash value, whether it is going to be 1 byte file or 1 KB file or 1 MB file or 1 GB file, if you use MD5, you will get 128 bit length of output. If it is SHA, you will get 160 bit of output. You're getting my point, right? So this is what integrity is all about. Now the third component, what is that? Availability. You remember we were talking about this availability during our failover discussion. I don't know how many of you could remember it. We were talking about 99.999% of uptime. So what is that? Whenever the data has been requested by a legitimate user, it should be available for him. How he is accessing, from where he is accessing, doesn't matter for us, because he's authorized to use that application or the data. It should be available for him. Now, when it comes to VPN, that A stands for authenticity, not availability. You understand what I'm saying? So what we basically do is we are achieving that availability by authenticating couple of things. Like what? When it comes to authenticity, there are two types of authentication, two areas we will be doing the authentication. One of the authentication is what? A source authentication. That means when the tunnel is being requested to be established, there are two participating peers, right? There are two participating peers. They are trying to establish a tunnel between them. While the tunnel establishment request is coming to me, I have to validate whether this request is coming from a trusted source or not. How do I do it? By authenticating it. So once the authentication is successful and the parameter negotiations are happening, the tunnel will come up. See, think of tunnel as a logical one. It's not a physical one, right? So it's a logical one. By encapsulating the data, we believe that there is a tunnel is going on. So when the data has been received, it is being received on the public network, via the public network. Now, how do you confirm that no one else has sent the data by encapsulating as the original sender has sent it. That's where the message authentication comes into picture. So basically we do two areas we will be doing the authentication in VPN. One is during the tunnel establishment, which is called as a source authentication. The second one is once the tunnel has been successfully formed, the data whatever has been exchanged over the tunnel is going to be validated or authenticated using the message authentication. The popular source authentication mechanisms are PSK, which is nothing but pre-shared key, not CSK. Pre-shared key. Whereas the other one, very popular, is digital certificates. To authenticate the end user, to authenticate the VPN peer, we can take the help of a pre-shared key, or we can also use the digital certificate. Typically we call it as an RSA signature. Message authentication is being used as what? HMAC, hashing message authentication code. Probably you could recollect now, while you are configuring your IPsec VPN, you will be associating an HMAC along with the hash value. So without hashing, HMAC is not possible, right? But HMAC is optional when it comes to integrity. While you are working with the hashing process, do you have to use HMAC? It's optional. If you want to use it, you use it. If you don't want to use it, it's okay. Now basically, pre-shared key, we know what is the pre-shared key. A key is going to be entered on both the sides, with which the validation is going to be happening, or else I can also take the help of a digital certificate to validate the peers. But HMAC is going to be little bit tricky. Like what? We already seen, while A is sending the data, a copy of the data is going to be sent through the hash process, right? And then you will generate a hash value, and that hash value is going to be attached, right? And this hash value received by the receiver and store it as received hash value. The receiver will take a copy of the data and then he will send it through the hash process. The hash process must be identical between both the parties. Then he will get something called as what? A generated hash value. And the generated hash and received hash is going to be compared. If it is same, then the data has not been modified on the wire. If it is not, then the data has been modified on the wire. Now my point here is how this communication or how this HMAC is going to be achieved. See, message needs to be authenticated. When the receiver receives it, by comparing the hash value, he can confirm that the data has not been modified. But the receiver should also know or validate whether the received message is coming from A or not. How this is going to be happening? After taking the copy of the data and before sending it to the hash, a key is going to be added. A key, consider that as a password. Consider that as a password. So a key is going to be added. So the hash value is based on the data plus key. You understand? Now, even though, so while I'm sending the data, I'm generating the hash value. While I'm generating the hash value, the key is also being added. So the hash value, what I have received, what I have generated on the sender side is a combination of data plus key. You understand? So while the data has been sent on the wire, if the attacker is intelligent enough, he is going to be modify the data in such a, it's very difficult. See, generating a text with a predictable hash value is very, very difficult. But still, assuming that the attacker has modified the data in such a way that this hash value will match. Okay, the receiver receives, he has matched that, means he has stored the received hash value. Now the receiver is not going to be simply generating the hash value on the received data. If he is doing it, then the received hash value and generated hash value will match. Instead, while he is generating the hash value, he will also add the same key. How do we know that? Because there is a process of having the identical key across A and B. So when the receiver is going to be generating the hash value, he will also add the key and then he will generate the hash value. Because of that, even an attacker is going to be modifying the text to match the hash value. Because we are adding the key, that hash value is not going to be matching at all. In that way, we can achieve the integrity along with message authentication. So the messages are going to be authenticated using the key while the hashing process is going on. We call this as HMAC. HMAC stands for what? Hashing Message Authentication Code. Is that clear? You understand what I'm saying? Any clarifications are there?